As we are well aware, the first peoples understand that this land, the waters around it, and the skies about it are sacred. They experience the interrelatedness of all beings, the wholeness within which all beings are held, and they know themselves as intrinsically belonging in country, the place that gives them their identity. In this context, Senior Australian of the Year, Dr. Miriam Rose Ungerman-Bowman, invites us into her experience of Didiri, a deep listening to land, as she reflects on her connection to country. Didiri is inner, deep listening, a quiet, still awareness. Didiri recognises the deep spring that is inside us. We call on it, and it calls on us. This is the gift that Australia is searching for, she says, thirsting for. It is something like what we call contemplation. And for those of you who are not familiar with Didiri, the organisers will circulate a full copy of Miriam's reflection after this gathering. As Phyllis said, I was asked to lead us in an opening prayer. But to that extent, that we understand prayer as an exchange between divine mystery and ourselves, I suggest that our whole session tonight is a prayer-filled experience in terms of understanding that the entire material universe speaks of God's love. Whilst we are bringing this more strongly into our consciousness in these times, there is a thread in our Christian heritage that has borne witness for many centuries to this knowledge. And Hildegard of Bingen illustrates this for us when she writes in the 12th century, "Prayer is nothing but the inhaling and exhaling of the one breath of the universe." And she says, "Holy persons draw to themselves all that is earthly." And this is the context in which we would pray tonight, drawing ourselves into all that is earthly. There are myriad other examples, but Gerard Manley Hopkins' poem talks to us of the world being charged with the grandeur of God. And in this sense, the whole world is a sacrament, an outward sign of the indwelling of God. So now I invite you to take a moment to recall a time when you were the only human in a place that is special to you in the natural world. You have had many of these experiences. So just quickly recall one. Watching a sunrise or a sunset, walking in the bush, swimming in the sea or a river, or perhaps simply being in your garden. Sometime when you were the only human present, but you had some sense of other presences there with you. Recall how you felt, what you were sensing. And we'll just take a silent moment now for you to re-enter that experience. Ideally, you would have time to share that experience with each other. And if you did, I suspect that you would describe it as peaceful, wondrous, nourishing, soothing, similar words, or maybe even mystical. You may not have used the word love, but could it be that the material universe, the physicality all around you, the water, the sky, the plants, the birds, the animals, the beings who were with you in that place were infused with the love of God, communicating with you at that time? We have come out of centuries of separation between the revelation of God found in the physical world and the revelation of our sacred scriptures. We are between stories in terms of meaning making. There is no time to go into it this evening, but suffice to say that we are once again discovering the ancient wisdom that understands that the whole universe in its physicality is a revelation of the divine. And for us, this divine presence is to be found here on a tiny planet, 2/3 of the way out on a spiral arm of the Milky Way galaxy, which is just one of billions of galaxies with trillions of stars. And God alone knows how many solar systems there are, similar to our own. And this whole extraordinary creation is infused with the creative love of divine mystery, holding it all in being. So there can be no opposition between sacred and secular, holy and profane, spirit and matter. They are infused with each other, two sides of the same coin and intimately connected. On this tiny planet, all beings are interrelated, brought to life through 4.5 billion years of evolution. And this is what Pope Francis is at pains to help us understand in Laudato Si. Published on Pentecost Sunday 2015 and on the 50th anniversary of the closure of the Second Vatican Council, this encyclical calls for nothing less than a bold cultural revolution. How often have we heard the Church calling for a bold cultural revolution? Religions emerge out of cultures as people share their perceptions and stories. So this call for a bold cultural revolution is asking that we, followers of Jesus, check our belief systems, practices, and actions, and align them with the new insights and consciousness that modern science and learning offers, and develop them in the context of an integral ecology and indeed an integral ecology. Pope Francis goes on to say, many things have to change course, but it is we human beings above all who need to change. We lack an awareness of our common origin, of our mutual belonging, and of a future to be shared with everyone. This basic awareness, he says, would enable the development of new convictions, attitudes, and forms of life. A great cultural, spiritual, and educational challenge stands before us. And this is what you're setting out on tonight on your journey into implementing the calls of Laudato Si. Lost the page, but never mind, I don't know what it means. He then laments that the whole world is suffering. Our earth, our home, is beginning to look more and more like an immense pile of filth. And in this lament, he establishes a basic premise of the document, that destruction of ecosystems for economic benefit of a few is intrinsically linked to the further impoverishment of the poorest of peoples. In the opening paragraphs of the letter, and in the spirit of Vatican II, he urgently appeals for a new dialogue about how we are shaping the future of our planet. We need a conversation which includes everyone, since the environmental challenge we are undergoing and its human roots to the environmental challenge concern and affect us all. Obstructionist attitudes, even on the part of believers, can range from denial of the problem to indifference, nonchalant resignation, or blind confidence in technical solutions. And in that context, we might reflect on our government's approach to what they were bringing to COP26, which was an effort to develop a new and universal solidarity. Laudato Si is a rich and complex document, a tapestry of interwoven threads often repeated. In the brief time available tonight, we'll just focus on 4 of these. The interconnectedness of all things, the intrinsic value of every being, the absolute connection between the cry of earth and the cry of those made poor. Anthropocentrism, which, because that word is difficult to say, I will use the term human-centred. And he says, nothing in this world is indifferent to us. When we think of our first, everything in the material universe speaks to us of God's love. So nothing in this world, we have time with these quotes about sinfulness in Laudato Si, and we can see the interconnectedness of certain actions, any actions having their impact, their flow-on effect. Seeing through contemporary eyes, Francis rejects some elements of the traditional interpretation of Scripture and rather believes that the revelation of Scripture leads us to see that soil, water, mountains, everything, as it were, a caress of God. In quoting St. Augustine, he says, God has written a precious book whose letters are the multitude of created things present in the universe. Everything is interconnected. He does admit very early in the document that he would repeat himself many times. And in terms of interconnection and interrelatedness, he does that, certainly. Everything is interconnected, and genuine care for our own lives and relationships with nature is inseparable from fraternity, justice, and faithfulness to our fellow humans. He then quotes the Canadian bishops who say that from panoramic vistas to the tiniest living form, nature is a constant source of wonder and awe. It is also a continuing revelation of the divine. In discussing a universal communion, Francis insists everything is related, and we human beings are united as brothers and sisters on a wonderful pilgrimage, woven together by the love God has for each of the creatures, which also unites in fond affection with Brother Sun, Sister Moon, Brother River, and Mother Earth. And not even atoms, he says, or subatomic particles can be considered in isolation, just as the different aspects of the planet, physical, chemical, and biological, are interrelated. So too, living species are part of a network which we will never fully explore and understand, all held in the mystery of God. And in reflecting on Scripture, he says an inadequate presentation of Christian anthropology gives rise to a wrong understanding of the relationship between human beings and the world. And this diagram illustrates that wrong relationship, wrong understanding. See that the image on the left is very indicative of our world at the moment. We see the humans at the top of the pyramid, and we look at what's happening as a consequence of that mindset. Laudato Si is calling us into an ecocentric mindset where we see ourselves as integral parts of the community of life. And with that understanding, Earth and her vitality can flourish. So Francis says that what was handed on in the interpretation of certain scriptural passages was a Promethean vision of mastery over the world, which gave the impression that the protection of nature was something only the faint-hearted greenies cared about. Creatures exist, he says, only in dependence on each other, to complete each other in the service of each other, in communion, in that love of God manifest in creation. He quotes the Catechism in a very not quoted statement where it says each creature possesses its own particular goodness and perfection. Now, I bet you most of us have not seen this statement in the Catholic Catechism. Each of the various creatures willed into its own being reflects in its own way a ray of God's infinite wisdom and goodness. Humans must therefore respect the particular goodness of every creature to avoid any disordered use of things. A misguided understanding of the place of the human leads to a misguided lifestyle. And indeed, no true spirituality can remain simply as a devotion. It must express itself in action to be a valid spirituality. And that's what we're exploring in this whole process. From this, we can draw that we must translate any understanding, we must translate our own love of God and love of our planet into some form of action. The cry of earth and the cry of those made poor ring out together, and action to enable the vitality of one brings about the vitality of the other. And I'm sure Jackie will lead us into further understanding of that. In conclusion, I would like to suggest that whatever about the significance and global imperative crises that we are in, the invitation of this teaching is all summed up in this wonderful, insightful statement. The universe unfolds in God, who fills it completely. Hence, there is a mystical meaning to be found in a leaf, in a mountain trail, in a dewdrop, in a poor person's face. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anne, for that really wonderful reflection, highlighting interconnectedness and many other issues in God's wonderful creation. So I would invite our audience, we have just a few minutes available, but I invite our audience, if you'd like to ask a question, please use the chat function in Zoom to type your question, and Adrian will try to summarise those questions and ask them of Anne. So we should also at this point put our hands together for what was a very, I think, a wonderful presentation, Anne. And, you know, I've taken notes here and I will ponder for many days those points you've raised. So a very big thank you, Anne, for your presentation. Thank you. Adrian, do we have any questions of Anne?
Yes, we have one question, and I think I have a question myself too, although I'm not sure whether my question has an end point. So we might start with the one that we've currently got, and that is your vegetable garden, Anne. do you reflect, or do you see the connections that Pope Francis talks about in Laudato Si in terms of universal connectedness in your garden?
Well, my garden is one of my best teachers, Adrian, and at the moment my garden is sadly lacking, mainly because I haven't paid enough attention to it, but I'm waiting for tomatoes to grow and all sorts of things. But I think the garden, for me, the garden is a real indication that we have no control much over anything. We plant tiny little seedlings or larger bushes or whatever we do. We can do very little to make them grow. Earth, the air, the sun, the water, the minerals in the soil, all of those. It does show the interconnectedness of everything, and it brings out such joy and wonder in me as a human, and keeps reminding me to be grateful for the beauty of this planet, but also to understand death and to understand that all of those annoying insects and caterpillars and snails and whatever else are feeding, entitled to feed on my plants. They're not my plants, they're Earth's plants. But, you know, there's an interrelationship between all of that. So one of the best places to learn about the mysteries of the universe is the garden, I believe.
Thanks very much, Anne. Now, my question, I don't know that it has an end, is it's in relation to Laudato Si, and with Phil, I was deeply moved by your presentation, which is more in the way of a prayer, I think. And it made me reflect upon the fact that there are so many levels within Laudato Si, from throwing away rubbish to a journey into infinite light. And all of us are somewhere in between, I guess. And so for Laudato Si, it seems to me that there's no one or no right answer in terms of what should we do, brothers, but rather what should I do, and how can I play my part in this cosmic experience? As I said, it doesn't really have an end.
No, it doesn't have an end at all, Adrian, but I think it's a question that most of us would be asking. There are layers, there are many layers in Laudato Si, and it connects us to a whole lot of other thinking and teaching and learning and evolving consciousness. And it's a very complex document, but it is a witness to a call in us to move our religious experience and beliefs into a new context, a bold cultural revolution. And there are so many ways to come into this, and I'm sure Jackie will share with us some of those ways. There are many, many ways. One is simply contemplation. One is, recycling, reusing, reducing, all of those sort of things. Another is learning more, developing a spirituality by being attracted to this story, paying attention to it, joining with others, learning what it means, developing our inner response to it, and then acting out of it, and then returning to be nourished again. There's so many ways. You're right, there is no end to the question, because we live in an expanding universe. And so our souls are being invited, our whole selves are being invited into that expansive thinking.
Thanks very much, Anne. There aren't any further questions, so I'll hand back to you, Phil.
Okay, thanks, Adrian, and thanks very much. And I was just really reflecting on your comments there, drawing ourselves into all that is earthly, and the world is charged with the grandeur of God. And, I found that presentation really deep and very moving. So thank you. And thank you, Adrian, for the questions.